Here's why the Empire, and especially the leaders of the Imperial military, absolutely hate the clones. In the first 2 episodes of Season 2, it becomes pretty apparent that a recurring theme of the show is all about the existence of soldiers during a time of peace, in this case referring to the clones. It becomes abundantly clear that while the Bad Batch are trying to stay under the radar of the Empire, they're also trying to find some sort of purpose in their life. And while members such as Hunter appear to be content with just the way things are, other members such as Echo don't seem to agree, preferring to rejoin the fight against the Empire, attempting to spark some sort of rebellion. And this theme is nonetheless most apparent when we get to see the conversation between Tech and the Old Man, in which the Old Man approaches Tech for some help with fixing a data archive.
A separatist archive. Fascinating.
Not separatist. Seronnian. We did exist before the war, you know.
I never thought of it like that.
Tech refers to this archive as a separatist archive and not a Seronnian archive, something which the Old Man corrects and actually underlines the sad reality of these clones. That during the process of their creation and training, there was never any intention for these clones to serve a purpose once the war was over. The lack of knowledge or perspective about the world around them outside the context of a conflict simply reveals that the Kaminoans, the Jedi, and the Republic never planned for these clones to make it this far. No thought was spared or considered regarding the welfare of these clones and what they might do after. This inadvertently also means that without an ongoing conflict, these clones have no purpose simply because no one has decided to give them one. And this idea of a purposeless clone lends itself to the central question of Season 2. What are the Bad Batch going to do, and more importantly, what will they decide on what they want to be? After all, if no one's going to give you a purpose or sense of direction, then it's up to the clones to find it themselves. And so, while the central plot of Season 2 will be about the Bad Batch finding a purpose bigger than themselves, it also means that Palpatine has no long-term plans for these clones. He doesn't have a scheme or a picture where the clones will play a part in the long run. In Season 1 of the show, we get a few episodes where Tarkin visits the Kaminoans to discuss the future of the cloning project. And one of the biggest reasons for Tarkin's objection to the continuation of the cloning program is simply that the program cost a lot of money. And in a time where the war has ended and the Empire's attention will be refocused on establishing order and strengthening its grip over the galaxy, it becomes incredibly costly to have these highly trained clones as foot soldiers. Instead, this is sort of where Admiral Rampart and Project Warmantle come in, preferring to use regular people as foot soldiers in order to keep the cost down while still being able to perform the simpler task of maintaining the Empire's control. From a military perspective, it's simply far too costly and wasteful to employ these highly specialized soldiers when ordinary soldiers can do the job at a lower cost. And the end of the cloning program is clearly cemented by the end of Season 1 with the destruction of Taboka City. Once again demonstrating that the Empire really doesn't want to have more clones or even want to keep them around. Another reason, a surprising reason for why the Empire might not want to keep the clones around for much longer actually comes from the moral compasses of the clones. Since the events of Order 66, it has become abundantly clear that the effects of the inhibitor chip is waning, slowly but surely. In fact, back in Season 1, we got to see Captain Hauser make the difficult decision to mutiny against the Empire in protest of what he saw was the unjust treatment of the Republic's former allies, and in the process of doing so, managing to convince several other clones to join him, demonstrating that the once absolute control the inhibitor chip had was now far from absolute, allowing many of the clones to reclaim control of their own actions. And if there's one thing the Clone Wars show and the Bad Batch has shown us about the clones, is that for the most part, the majority of them are pretty good-hearted individuals, capable of compassion and empathy, far from the heartless machines Order 66 made them to be. And so while some of them might feel conflicted about choosing what's right and following orders, they will struggle under the climate of imperial politics. And this was abundantly clear when we saw the interaction between Rampart and Wilco.
I've come to address some inaccuracies in your mission report, which is why a new report will be submitted. One void of any mention of Clone Force 99.
I will not falsify an official report.
I understand.
Wilco's refusal to forge military reports in favor of Rampart perfectly summarizes the problems the clones face under the command of the Empire. More specifically, their moral compasses and their sense of what a good soldier is prevents them from adapting to the Empire's political system, a system which focuses more on social Darwinism, backstabbing, schemings, and plots. And while the clones' rigid sense of what makes a good soldier is great for the battlefield, it lacks the versatility needed to survive in Imperial military politics. And so the moment Imperial commanders such as Rampart realize that clones cannot be depended on to set aside morals in pursuit of their own self-interest, they'll be more than willing to get rid of them. It's much easier to bend the will of ordinary people than it is to bend the will of a clone engineered to be the perfect soldier. Which means that many of these Imperial military leaders will view these clones more as liabilities than assets when it comes to their own careers, viewing them as redundant relics of the past to be discarded when no longer useful, which is exactly what we saw with Wilco. And so, what I think we will see as we move further into Season 2 of The Bad Batch is that more and more of the Imperial leadership will start to view the clones as obsolete, viewing them as more of a hindrance to the Empire's military objectives, as well as a hindrance to their own personal goals, all of which would lead to a general push towards the complete replacement of the clones with their newer and more corruptible successors, the Stormtroopers. This drastic change in regime from the Republic to the Empire brings alongside a massive change in leadership and the type of leadership as well, possibly causing some serious discontent among the clones, and especially now that the effects of the inhibitor chip has begun to fade, we are sure to see more and more clones defecting from the Empire. If this is indeed the case, it would also explain this short scene in the trailer.
Rumors are more and more clones have been questioning the Order.
Then they are traitors, like the Jedi.
Cluing us in as to one of the growing number of reasons as to why clones are choosing to walk away from the Empire despite being bred as loyal soldiers. But regardless as to whether this was one of the major or minor reasons for why the Empire chose to get rid of the clones, it's pretty clear that the Imperial leadership really despises clones, despising them simply because it's much harder to manipulate clones to get them to do what they want without the help of the inhibitor chip. Not to mention, if this is indeed a reason for why the Imperial military decided to get rid of clones in favor of Stormtroopers, it would also add a whole lot more detail to the growing corruption within the Empire, as well as the growing influence of the Imperial military. On the other hand, the Empire's growing mistreatment of the clones and exploitation would also be a major reason for a clone rebellion. Given that breeding and cloning humans for the sole purpose of fighting and dying in a war is already a major moral gray area, the Empire's decision to cast them aside further adds to the idea that these clones are victims. In a way, these clones are slaves to the Republic and now slaves to the Empire, barely considered to be equal citizens under the eyes of the Empire. And so what we'll probably see in Season 2 is that more and more clones will now seek emancipation, which runs in parallel with the main plot of the show, the Bad Batch's desire to find a purpose greater than themselves. So that is why the Empire actually hates clones despite the fact that the clones are excellent soldiers. Anyways, that's all for this video. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. I am the Lost Acolyte,
and I have spoken.